Linux is low-key blowing up. It just broke 5% desktop market share in the US. That might sound small to you, but this is actually massive. Germany's numbers are even higher, well past 5%. Even the Steam Deck and Legion Go S run Linux. And honestly, games run smoother than on Windows. Do you think Windows can make a comeback?
Windows 10 is dead. Microsoft killed it on October 14th, 2025. Hundreds of millions of users left holding hardware Microsoft says is now too old. And Satya Nadella, Chief Executive Officer of Microsoft, is watching the numbers respond in a way his earnings calls cannot explain away. Here is what Nadella doesn't want you calculating. No more security patches. No more updates. No more protection. Your computer still works. Microsoft just stopped caring if it stays safe. The official exit routes: buy a new PC that meets Windows 11's requirements, or pay Microsoft a yearly subscription to keep your old one patched. That subscription, the Extended Security Update Program, was previously only available to enterprise clients. Now it is being offered to regular consumers for the first time. In plain terms, Microsoft created the problem, then built a toll booth at the exit. And here is where it gets worse. Microsoft's more personal computing segment, the division that includes Windows, reported $14.3 billion in revenue in the second quarter of fiscal 2026. That was a 3% year-over-year decline. That same quarter, Nadella's company paid out $12.7 billion in dividends and buybacks. The hardware business is slowing. The shareholder checks are not. Meanwhile, something else is growing. Desktop Linux hit a record 4.7% global market share in 2025, according to StatCounter data. Specific countries like India reached over 16%, and the United States crossed 5% for the first time in 2025. Those numbers tell a story. The direction is not reversing. Now watch what happens next. October 14th, 2025. The date is documented. The policy is confirmed. Windows 11's TPM 2.0 requirement is not a rumor. It is a stated hardware specification that excludes any PC manufactured before roughly 2017 depending on configuration. That is not a software limitation. That is a wall. Jeffrey Clark, Vice Chairman and Chief Operating Officer of Dell, a company that sells the exact hardware Microsoft needs consumers to buy, stated publicly that Windows 11 adoption is 10 to 12 points behind where Windows 10 adoption was at the same point in the previous upgrade cycle. What that means for you: even the hardware companies that profit from new PC sales are admitting the upgrade is stalling. That is not what Nadella says on earnings calls. That is what his own partners say when the audience is less friendly. Let me repeat that. The Linux OS market was valued at $21.97 billion globally as of 2024. Market research projects it reaching $99.69 billion by 2032. That growth is not enterprise only. It is desktop Linux. Consumer Linux. People who looked at the Windows 11 upgrade wall and chose the door marked free. What we can verify: the end-of-life date, the TPM 2.0 requirement, the Dell executive's public statement, the more personal computing revenue decline, and the Linux market share records. What we cannot claim: Microsoft's internal projections for subscription uptake or exact consumer revenue targets. What Nadella's team calls a security-focused platform transition actually means hardware you bought 5 years ago has been reclassified as incompatible, not because it stopped working, but because Microsoft drew a line around it. And that line generates revenue. Here is exactly how this works. 4 moves, 1 outcome. Move 1. Set a hard end-of-life date for the most widely used operating system on Earth. Hundreds of millions of users. 1 date. Done. Move 2. Require a hardware specification that excludes the majority of computers currently running Windows 10. The spec exists for legitimate security reasons. Enforcing it as a hard upgrade wall is a business decision. Move 3. Offer 2 exits, both of which generate revenue. A new PC purchase or a yearly extended security update subscription, a product that previously only existed for enterprise customers. Move 4. Describe the entire process as a safety initiative on the earnings call. What Nadella calls a security-first platform evolution actually means your working computer is now a liability unless you pay to keep it viable or replace it entirely. Here is what that actually does. It turns the natural lifespan of functional hardware into a revenue event for Microsoft every single year after the deadline. And that is not the end of it. Imagine you are a retired teacher in Ohio. You bought a laptop 4 years ago. It runs fine. You use it for email, video calls, and documents. It does not have TPM 2.0. After October 14th, 2025, your machine receives no security patches. You do not know this. Every week, the risk grows. Picture this scenario. You are a small business owner with 8 desktop computers purchased in 2019. They all run Windows 10. None qualify for Windows 11. Replacing all 8 costs up to nearly $10,000. The ASUS subscription adds a per-device yearly cost on top of that. Your IT budget did not plan for either. Imagine you are a parent who bought a family PC 2 years before the Windows 11 requirement was announced. You followed Microsoft's guidance at the time of purchase. Now that same computer is classified as unsupported. What Nadella's team calls hardware incompatibility actually means the goalposts moved after you already paid. Picture this scenario. You are a college student in a developing market. Your country's desktop Linux share just crossed historic highs. You switched because the alternative required hardware you could not afford. Nadella's forced upgrade cycle did not hurt your budget. It ended your relationship with Windows entirely. Here's the part nobody is talking about. Nadella's reported compensation for fiscal 2024 was approximately $79 million. The average consumer facing a forced PC replacement is looking at $500 to $1,200 in unplanned hardware costs. Those are not equivalent decisions. Under Nadella's watch, the choice to enforce the TPM 2.0 wall as a hard cutoff, rather than offering extended free security patching, made that cost mandatory for millions of households. The gap nobody talks about, Microsoft could have extended free security patches for Windows 10. They chose not to. The ASUS subscription and the hardware replacement cycle are not the only technical options available. They are the profitable ones. In plain terms, working computers were reclassified as unsafe, not because they broke, but because a deadline made it profitable for them to be. That is not a conspiracy. That is a product lifecycle strategy with a deadline attached. Enterprise customers in prior ASUS cycles paid annual per-device fees. Even at consumer rates, the subscription math across hundreds of millions of devices is a number that moves a quarterly earnings report. Every move in that mechanism was a decision. Nadella's organization made every one of them. Microsoft's public justification is consistent. Windows 11 offers enhanced security. TPM 2.0 is a necessary component, and the end-of-life policy follows standard support lifecycle practices. What they're really saying is, the upgrade is for your protection. The hardware cost is framed as technical necessity, not revenue strategy. Nadella has not addressed consumer ASUS pricing directly in any public statement. The earnings call spotlight Azure and Copilot. The more personal computing decline is attributed to PC market normalization after the pandemic hardware boom. The real cost is, the division that just orphaned hundreds of millions of devices is the one being quietly managed down. Consumer pushback is documented. Linux forums surged. Reddit communities focused on open-source alternatives exploded in activity after October 2025. The StatCounter data showing record Linux desktop share is not opinion. It is behavioral evidence. One factual nuance: some Windows 10 PCs can be upgraded to Windows 11 through workarounds that bypass the TPM 2.0 check. Microsoft does not support this path. It introduces its own risks. The official supported path still requires compliant hardware or a paid subscription. Watch the next Microsoft earnings call. Watch whether the more personal computing segment shows further decline or stabilization, and whether ASUS consumer subscription numbers are ever disclosed. Watch for any regulatory inquiry in the European Union or United Kingdom into whether the forced obsolescence policy constitutes anti-competitive behavior under consumer protection frameworks. Watch Linux distribution download statistics across the first and second quarter of 2026. The deadline already passed. Nadella hasn't addressed the exodus. The StatCounter data is addressing it for him. 4.7% global desktop Linux, over 16% in India, 5% and climbing in the United States. These are not rounding errors. These are users who finished the calculation and chose the door that does not charge them to keep using what already works. The next earnings call is coming. The numbers will respond. They always do.